The merchant had a well-spoken and beautiful parrot. One day, the merchant travels to India, and each of his family ask him for a gift. The merchant asks the parrot, "What about you, my sweet singing bird? What do you want me to bring you?"
Forward I went and sat beside him. He did not feel my approaching. It seems he was miles away. I said hi. He realized I was just there. Calmly he answered and again returned into his world. Time passed in silence. I had to break the stillness and said, "Brother, I see you sad and stricken. I feel sad for you. Tell me your secret. Maybe I can make it easier for you." He took his eyes from the ground and looked at me and said,
Can you imagine being thrown out of your own home by force and have it taken over? And if you ask why, they answer you with a gun.
"We respect freedom and liberty. We visit and greet the families of martyrs and casualties of war. And we greet and send our respect to devoted martyrs who gifted freedom and liberty to their people. We salute you."
Riz Ali would recall the days he spent watching the trains. He pictured the cheerful faces of the passengers who would wave to him. The idea of the dangerous accident about to happen made his heart stop. He searched for the crossroads to save the passengers.
In the years of the cruel Pahlavi regime, the powerful dominated by force the villagers. We have years of sacrifice to remedy those wrongs.
Oh dear mother, I sacrifice my life for you. Sacrifice for your kindness, tenderness, and affection. The kindness of a friend will never be the same as your kindness and faith.
My heart is your home. Oh dear mother, that you gave me my life. It is easy to give my life for you. Your happiness is my happiness, because happiness is God's happiness. If the power of the world was in my hand, I would sacrifice the world for you.
In the year 427, 65 years of his life had passed. He had written 113 books about different subjects: astronomy, medicine, mathematics, history, geography, pharmacy, and the cultures of nations. Even with near 1,000 years passing since his death, most of his ideas in his books look new. It feels that his way of thinking about science is close to today's scientists. He was always thinking about the reason behind why things happen.
Epoch, learning, philosopher, century, nations.
Without your leadership and your advice, how would we learn teamwork? Now the school year is ended. I thank you for everything you gave us and will make sure never to forget what you have taught us.
The texts that we've been reading here come from a selection of Iranian school books, which Afshin has collected. So Afshin, can you tell me a little bit about how you came across them and what really caught your interest?
Yeah, the images that you've been seeing and the texts that we've been reading out are from a collection of educational textbooks from Iran. And these are the actual textbooks. These are visuals from textbooks that my mother taught me when we came to England in the late 70s. And I was between the ages of 5 and 8 while she was teaching me. So I would go to normal kind of like English school in Fareham, and then I would come home, and then she would sit down with me for a few hours in the evenings and go through these textbooks. Now, in the context of Iran, we had left just before the revolution. We came for a very temporary stay. The revolution happened. We decided to see how that would transpire. Then in 1980, the Iran-Iraq war happened, and we ended up deciding to make Britain our home. So it was a kind of an involuntary migration that allowed us to be here. And it was a very strange scenario because I would go to school and we'd read books like, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Famous Five, and all of those kind of books. And then I would come home and read these kind of like revolutionary texts with my mum. But there was such a shortage of Farsi language textbooks. It was the only thing that she had to teach me from. And all of these textbooks, they are state published. So every child up and down the country in every year group will work from the same textbook. There is no deviation from that.
Did you see any were you conscious, or could you think about now sort of patterns of behavior that are in accordance to that consistent way of informing and educating children?
Well, in Iran, it's a very hierarchical system in terms of the classroom. There's the teacher and there's the student. There's no dialogue. You are taught and you learn by rote. And the whole premise of these textbooks is to pass on unto children in a very digestible form the ideology of the regime. And it's quite a effective system.
And because we have, you might notice here, there's a number of shots being taken, and these are all done with disposable cameras by children that you'd given them to. How did they initially respond when you gave cameras to them? And did you instruct them in any particular way?
No, I mean, you have to understand, I went there without actually any teaching experience at all.
Right.
And these groups of children are from South Tehran, and that's an important distinction to register, because much of the voice coming out of Iran is from the northern Tehran, which is a very secular, more of a Western-oriented viewpoint. And South Tehran is where all the migrants from the provinces come in order to sort of better their lives. And it's much more conservative. The density of mosques is much greater. Religion plays a much stronger role. And when I first went there and I walked into a room, and this was done outside of the school system. This wasn't state sanctioned in any way. I was kind of faced by some challenges which I wasn't expecting. And one was the boys and girls had never been in the same classroom together. So when I first arrived, the girls arrived early, and then the boys arrived, and they wouldn't cross the threshold of the door. They saw the girls in the room, and they just wouldn't come in. It was a completely alien environment for them.
Yeah.
And we overcame that eventually. And then it was actually handing out the disposable cameras. And then I'd assume that they'd just be able to sort of operate them, even though they're very simple kind of devices. But what happened in a few instances is they picked up the camera and they held it with a lens to their face and started clicking. You know, obviously they're going to get a flash in the face, and they didn't realize which way the lens was and which way, to actually point the device. But and we overcame that as well. And then I couldn't control them. They're pretty streetwise kids, and they are not accustomed to kind of group critiques. They're not accustomed to dialogue in that kind of sense that we are here in the classroom. There's a lot of violence between boys and girls. Some really feisty characters. So the only way to overcome that was to actually ask them to write a contract amongst themselves. So they sat down and they wrote the kind of house rules. And I think number one was you don't hit a classmate. And then we went on from there.
So going back to my first question, is that if the role of the photographer is removed from the process of taking photography, or photographs, I should say, does that then is the lie different? Is the lie that the image creates different?
It's a good question. I mean, when I was thinking about this project on reflection, I kind of did it all very intuitively. It was kind of a visceral project, and I was feeling my way through it as much as the kids were. And when you come back, you kind of start looking at other practitioners and how other kind of artists have done this kind of work. And you come across of community workers and what we kind of call outreach projects and outreach officers. And they have this model, and some of you may be familiar with it. It's called the ladder of participation. And it essentially sort of sets out these various degrees of how you can work with a community or a group. And at one end of the spectrum, there's manipulation. And then you go through various degrees of tokenism. And then the kind of the gold standard end is full devolution of power, where the participant has full control and full power, and the artist or whoever is leading the project kind of actually takes a step back. And when I began, I just intuitively just handed everything over to the children. I didn't mark. There was no marking. There was no curricula. It was an invisible curricula. There was no reference works that I showed them. They were just free to shoot whatever they wanted. The only thing I did deviate a little bit with is they were trying to please me because they were used to pleasing the teacher.
Sure, yeah.
Or start as they call us, or teachers out there. And so they were taking very static, regimented kind of shots that they'd seen in sort of in their own kind of textbooks and so forth. And I just quickly tried to kind of like push them away from that and allow them to play and make mistakes and experiment. and kind of just shoot very loosely and liberally and not worry about technique. There's no technical training at all in these sessions.
So you're thinking around this juxtaposition of, you know, the state-sponsored school books and your photographs, which the photographs by the children, which are more obviously more spontaneous. Do you see any remnants of, say, that kind of doctrine that was available, that was there in those school books, in the children that you were working with and teaching?
Yeah, I mean, they were quite reticent in sharing some images.
Mm-hmm.
The process was that I would shoot film, or we would shoot film. And part of the reason was that that prevented them from self-censoring as they went along. This kind of instant feedback that you get from digital photography allows you to kind of like curate your own self-image as you go along. By shooting film, they were prevented from doing that. So I would print up 6x4-inch work prints from the previous week's shot, and then I would hand it to them, and then we would lay them out on a table. But when I used to give the packs to them on the Wednesdays, they would just quickly just run into the corner of the room, like hide and just flick through and then pick out certain images that they didn't want. So that became less and less so as the sort of trust was built on throughout time. But it was, I mean, from speaking to them, from the feedback I got them, a couple of them, you know, really wanted to become photojournalists after this. But the opportunities to do so are pretty non-existent for them.